Welcome to the channel. Thank you everyone for tuning in. So in today's video, we will be doing a comparison between two extremely popular watches, both homaging a very popular watch itself. Now, the watches that I'm going to be comparing amongst each other, one is the Pagani design PD1751, and the other is the San Martin SN0107. And as you can see, it is totally sterile. That's because I ordered a sterile version because I have other plans for this watch. So after this comparison, I'll be looking to modify this with a nice dial and hand combo that I've got in mind. Now, with that being said, the premise of today's comparison is to battle these two watches out, make them go head to head on every element of the watch, from the dial to the case, bracelet, and every feature that you see. Now, the way the critical comparison works, I have a scoring sheet, and I basically try to objectively score each watch on every feature, as I said, on value add stuff, on something which is going to be more expensive to create. For example, I don't know, an applied logo is going to be more expensive than a printed logo, for example. So I've got my template here, and a lot of you guys have seen this, you know what I'm talking about. And basically at the end of the video, I'll give you guys a total score, comparing the prices of both and giving you a good value for money score. Now, part of the summary for this particular watch, I said rather than spend whatever this watch costs, it's better to probably fork out X amount more for any other alternatives. Now, the only alternative we have on AliExpress is, of course, this San Martin. So we are going to check that out as well. So hopefully you guys would have a better idea towards the end of the video, which is the watch to go for, which is a better value for money. Not only that, which is probably the best quality one to go for, right? It's not always about the cheapest one. Sometimes it's better to spend that little bit more to get a better made watch. So let's make a start and start off by comparing the specifications and dimensions of both watches, and we're going to go into a fair bit of detail here. So with regards to dimensions, the Pagani design and the San Martin are both coming in at 36.5 millimeters, and that measurement is from the edge of the bezel on both. The thickness of the Pagani design is 13.5 millimeters. And then you've got the thickness for the San Martin is coming in at 12 millimeters. That is due to that high dome box sapphire crystal. And you can see the Pagani design uses a much higher top hat than the one on the San Martin. Now, lug to lug on both is 44 millimeters. Now, these have been rounded up or down to the nearest 0.5 mil. And the lug width is 20 mil on the Pagani, and it's the same for the San Martin. So straight off the bat, in terms of the dimensions, they are both pretty evenly matched. Now, the weight on the Pagani design is 131 grams, of course, all links present. And on the San Martin, it's 128 grams, so not much between them at that point also. Now, moving on to the crowns, you can see they both have different crowns, and point to note from the watch they're homaging, I think both crowns are quite off. The watch they're actually homaging uses a much different crown. Now, in terms of measurements of the crowns, on the San Martin, you've got a 5.9 mil diameter with about 2.5, 2.7 mil thickness. It's quite difficult to kind of measure that. But with the Pagani design, you've got a smaller crown coming in at 5.4 mil. However, much wider crown, so it's about 3.3 mil. Now, that's quite important because it does have an impact on usability of the crown, on function of the crown. Moving on to the bracelet, both bracelets, as I said, 20 millimeters on the lug width. Both do taper down to 16 millimeters and come up to 18 millimeters at the clasp. So straight away, in terms of dimensions, as I said, both watches are pretty evenly matched, and they don't differ that much on the specifications. So both have a sapphire crystal with AR coating, both of course, as you can see, stainless steel. Now, on the water resistance, that's where they'll differ. The Pagani design allegedly gives you 200 meters, whereas the San Martin gives you a more conservative 100 meters. I'm not going to comment on the water resistance. I think you know my thoughts on WR anyway. Anything from China, they're not tested, so you can only take what they say on the piece of paper. Now, with regards to the movements, both have the Seiko NH35 and both use a ghost position. But not only that, even more lazily, they both have date discs, which you can hear clicking. Now, I can possibly forgive the Pagani for that because of the low price point, but San Martin, that is extremely, extremely lazy on their side. Now, before I go any further, I am conscious I gave you guys a quick glimpse of what's on my wrist, and due to the color, it might get some people thinking what it is. So this is my latest acquisition. This is a vintage Seiko Quartz SQ model, as you can see, in a lovely piano black against that gold case and bracelet. So absolute stun of a watch. I really like wearing this, but yeah, a bit out there for some people. So right, back to the San Martin and the Pagani. So specs and dimensions out the way. Price point for both watches, you know, they differ yeah, so much. The Pagani design is at the bottom end of that price point. You're looking at £93. And you know, after sales you can get this for around 80-ish pounds. The San Martin, this is currently sitting at £208, but after sale you can pick it up for around the £185 mark, depending on you know, the amount of discount you get. So the San Martin is more than double the price of the Pagani design. But is it twice as better? This is the whole point of this critical comparison. Now, the first thing which we are going to focus on is the dial. Now, both dials are pretty much similar, you know, very similar setup because it is homologing the same watch. You've got the numerals 12369, you've got the applied batons, and the application is applied loom, layered loom on there rather than any applied sort of hour markers. But we also have quite a few differences. If you look at the texture on the Pagani design, you've got a high gloss or a piano black dial. Very dark black gives you a great contrast against that, you know, vintage loom application. And on the San Martin, you've got that washed out black, that grayed out dial. And you know, I don't like that personally. And from what I can gather from a lot of subscribers, you know, looking at your various comments and stuff, you know, not a lot of people actually like this grayed out dial. Now, as well as that, granted, this is a sterile version for the San Martin, but the logo they do provide is a printed logo with printed text, as opposed to the Pagani design. Yes, it does have printed text above the 6, but it also has a polished applied logo, which is that Pagani design. So therefore, it's going to be just, again, a touch more expensive than the one on the San Martin. Both, of course, dateless, which didn't follow through into the choice of movement. However, both are also very similar in terms of the printing, just slightly different on the minute track, and you know, just some shape and size of the numerals. But that's nothing to compare. Now, if we look at the handset, again, extremely similar hands, and they've actually both got the same issues. So I'm going to zoom in here, and the first thing I want to show you on the handset, and I picked this up on the Pagani design when I did the review, is just the quality of that hour hand. It's a little rough around the edges, you know, they're not clean cut hands. I believe they might be stamped when they get created, and you can see, you know, those blades are dull. You haven't got a clear cut edge. And unfortunately, it's the same thing to say for San Martin. You know, just because it is San Martin, I don't see a large degree of difference with the San Martin hands. If anything, they're slightly worse, because you'll notice on the San Martin hands, there's a lot more debris, dirt, you know, grime, fingerprints, etc. present on the handset, which is quite shocking. And I have to say, you know, as an observation, I've seen their quality starting to kind of drop down, especially, you know, when it's come to, you know, the handset. I mean, of course, the pictures they take on their website are immaculate, but, you know, that's a very specially selected piece. But with, you know, your stuff coming out the door, you can see the quality of the hands isn't as good, and they've also got a bit of, you know, roughness around the edge of that hour hand also. So not much difference between the hands. Both are equally as bad, I'd say, in my opinion, and both are just normal. They're flat, polished, nothing really exciting going on with the handset. But the biggest thing for me is just how much dirtier the handset on the San Martin is versus the cheaper Pagani design. Now, an actual physical difference between the hands is when you look at the seconds hand, that tip of the seconds hand on the Pagani design is slightly smaller, but the length of the seconds hand also goes all the way towards the edge of the minute track, whereas on the San Martin you've got a slightly larger, slightly more legible tip on the end of that seconds hand, but it doesn't extend all the way out. Even though the red tip does touch the minute track, it doesn't extend out as much as it does on the Pagani. Visually, the Pagani one does look a little bit better. Now let's have a look at the loom. So the San Martin has BGW9 versus the Pagani with this old radium style loom, and clearly you can see San Martin is the clear winner. The loom is evenly applied and there's no patchiness in comparison to the Pagani design. The PD is very poor, totally the opposite of what the San Martin gives us. Very patchy, the hands are extremely dull, and a much weaker loom in comparison to the San Martin. So I think on the dial, I'll have to say Pagani will take it. They've got a gloss black dial and the applied logo, and the hands are slightly tidier than the one of the San Martin, but they are finished as bad as each other. The loom is much better on the San Martin. So in terms of points, it's give and take. I don't think any one of these two dials will be a clear winner in this. And I'll be scoring, you can see on the bottom side of the screen, and towards the end of the video I'll tell you exactly what the scores were. So let's move on to the sapphire crystals used. As I said, both are box style. I mean, there's not much to say here, just to show you basically a comparison between the two. So with the Pagani design, I feel the box is too high. It gives it a unnecessarily exaggerated side profile. I mean, you don't really need that high of a box sapphire crystal. And whereas, you know, with the San Martin, it's quite a bit lower, gives it a much sleeker profile. And in my opinion, it does look better. But of course, it's not about my opinion in this kind of comparison. So both will score evenly. They both got AR coating, they both got good fit and finish, and as I said, both are box style. That's just a preference, what I say, purely subjective on which one I like better. Of course, there's some people that would like the higher top hat much better than the one on the San Martin. Both will score evenly when it comes to the sapphire. Now the next one we're looking at is the actual bezel. Now with this Pagani design, one of my criticisms was the bezel, the fact that it is fully polished. It's nothing like the watch it's homaging, but fit and finish is good. The polish is good as well. I just think it should have been brushed. There's not as much going on to this, but I'll elaborate more when I get to the case why I think this is just a bit meh. You know, it's nothing special they've done on this watch. Now, if we compare that to the San Martin, this is where, you know, you're going to start seeing what San Martin are really good at. You can see very fine circular brushing, almost like satellite brushing on that bezel. And also you'll see a polished lip around the edge. You'll also see a kind of step design on that bezel, brushed underneath. So you've got like 3 different types of finishing here just on that bezel. So there's a hell of a lot of work gone into that, and this is what is going to be that value add feature. This is going to be more expensive to do. Very nice high polish around that bezel, and I like that because it does kind of separate that bezel from the case. As you can see, the case bezel, it is fully brushed, but I really like that highlight. And it's a different style of bezel. It's not as sloped as the PD. However, it is closer to the watch they're actually homaging. So when it comes to the bezel, the San Martin definitely takes the win over the Pagani design. Now moving on to the case, you know, both are brushed on the lugs, whereas the Pagani design is polished along the side. The San Martin is fully brushed. It also has a beveled polished edge, again in line with the watch's homaging, but San Martin do this to quite a lot of the cases. Very fine hairline brushing going across that case, almost satinized. In fact, I think it is satinized brushing. That is a very smooth touch. No sharp edges. You can see just a slight dent into the case as well, so it's not a totally flat case as we've seen on some other watches from San Martin. Very smooth brushing. You know, the case is, you know, superb quality. I can't really say anything more than that on the San Martin one. It is done extremely well. In comparison to the Pagani design, you know, it's okay. You've got relatively smooth brushing. I'm not going to knock that. The polishing is great. You know, but the problem I have with this Pagani design, that this is just a recycled case. It just has been repurposed from, you know, the other 17,000 models that they've got of this kind of case. This is more of a Explorer style case that they do, and as I said, many variants. So they've just kind of repurposed it. So it hasn't had to custom, you know, in terms of any R&D or any tooling mods, you know, to kind of get this case. So no custom molds, etc., to get this made. So this is where the San Martin will definitely take the win by a long shot, because they've had to create a whole new case. So that's cost for tooling, molds, etc., you know, finishing. They haven't recycled this from any other watches that they do, as far as I know. So they had to go out and create this just for this, because obviously due to the dimensions. They also give you a 38mm option, so you've got 36 and 38, so you can choose whichever one you want. Case back on both, you know, is more or less the same. There's nothing that differentiates it. This is a kind of bottle cap screw down case back, and whereas the PD is mineral glass exhibition. So let's give the Pagani design on the case back a point over the San Martin, because it is an exhibition case back. It's been actually machined really well, and one of the comments I made in the review that I think the case back's nicer than it is on many others. So for the overall of the case, San Martin takes that, definitely steals it. You just can't beat this finishing in hand. Very high quality. I love those polished highlights on the bezel and the actual case. Pagani design, not so much, just because it's been repurposed, and it is nowhere near in comparison to the San Martin, but just have a better case back. Now, the last category is, of course, the bracelet. Then we'll put them both on wrist and compare as well. So the bracelet, I made myself very, clear when I reviewed the Pagani design. There's just a lot of rattling in there. It feels quite cheap. It feels a lot lighter. But in terms of finishing, it's got it. It is finished quite well. It's got female end links, which is what you want. It's got a solid clasp. It's got screw-in links, polished sides. So the features are there, but it's not done amazingly well. It's just the lightness on the bracelet, the rattle. Now, I personally think this may not be 316L stainless steel. It is not unknown for a lot of these Chinese watch manufacturers to use a cheaper grade of steel, which kind of would explain how it just feels, even though it's solid, it feels a lot lighter than the one on the San Martin. It's this rattle on that female end link, and the brushing as well. I did notice on this side, you can see the brushing isn't dead straight. It kind of waves off in one area or one direction. Kind of makes it look like it was done by hand, but not in a good way, where the brushing just gone off on one direction. So there's not that much attention paid to it. I don't like this clasp. It's one of the older clasps, and they have got much better clasp, which is similar in terms of function to the San Martin, where it's got the twin pushers. And I don't know why they don't just use that, because that also comes with a quick and easy dials extension. And I think in this comparison, that clasp would have taken a point definitely over the San Martin, but they've gone with this bracelet. And while it's, I'd say, plenty adequate for the price point, I have to stop myself and consider the price point as well. It just feels a bit cheap and rattly, and I think this watch would look much better on a leather strap or a rubber strap as opposed to the steel one on here. Now, when we bring it over to the San Martin, again, one of the points that they excel on is bracelets. Let's start off with the end links. Amazing fit and finish, very smooth, straight hairline brushing. They haven't missed a trick here at all. Very nicely done. Clasp, such heavy detailing on here and heavy finishing on here. What type of clasp this is. We've seen them hundreds of times. 4 micro adjusts, very easy to, in terms of function. I love that level of finish. The links are solid, screw-in links. The screws are smoother on this than they are on the Pagani design, and you can tell there's just a bit more quality in those screws. What I also do like is on the end link, you do have a slight step here, a raised sort of feature on the center of the end link, and in comparison to the PD, it doesn't. And also, it's got a slight gap in comparison to the San Martin, so that just looks a little better. It's had, like I said, more machining done, and that female end link is good, seems solid, much more solid in comparison to the PD, and it doesn't have that same sound coming from it. It's not as rattly, it's not as jangly. The screws are solid. You don't hear that squeaking, that creaking that you get from these kind of bracelets again. So yeah, much better, a bit more substantial, but for the price point, PD's is okay. I'm only going by comparing it against the San Martin. So they will score very close on the bracelet, but San Martin will definitely just take that. And then let's put both watches on wrist, talk to you how comfortable they are. I think that's going to be just purely subjective, and then we'll summarize and look at the scores, and let's see what we have at the end of this comparison. So here's the San Martin and the Pagani design on my 6.5-inch wrist. And in terms of wearability, both watches do weigh okay. It's at 36.5 mil diameter. Both have got the same dimensions, in terms of lug to lug. The thickness doesn't really impact, the watch on wrist. But I have to say the San Martin feels a bit nicer on wrist. It definitely looks more refined. That brushed bezel does wonders for this watch, and that, nicer case. Yeah, so it definitely wears better. I much prefer wearing this on my wrist over the Pagani design. Much nicer bracelet. You don't feel that looseness, that cheapness in the watch. And yeah, I much prefer this, of course. Now, there's a couple of subjective elements on the brush bezel, the top hat crystal, but in terms of, just the quality and in terms of the value add, which is a better made watch, undeniably the San Martin is the better made watch. So here's the scores of what I've done. So let's just summarize between all the features, and I'll be quick through this. So in terms of the dial, the Pagani design took the overall win. It's got a glossier dial. It's got just, slightly nicer hands, but, that's not really what I wanted. And it's got applied logo. Much poorer loom in terms of the San Martin. The San Martin obviously blew the Pagani out of the water with the loom, but equally disappointed with both on the handset. I'm more so disappointed with San Martin with that, just the amount of dirt and grime that you saw on the hands. Not really good assembly process, not enough QC in there. And yeah, no, the lack of applied features on the dial and that matte black washed out dial, I'm not a huge fan of that, I have to say, and I much prefer a glossier dial. In terms of the top hat crystal, subjective. I prefer the San Martin one, but they both scored equally on that. Moving on to the bezel, as you can clearly see, there's a lot more work gone into the bezel on the San Martin. Looks a lot nicer, finished way better. Case, of course, much better case construction. It's closer to the watch. It's actually homaging as well. You know, it's a new case, finished amazingly well, looks the part, and you can see just side by side, definitely you'd choose the San Martin, right? PD repurposed, you know, not enough kind of cost gone into that. Yes, I get it, it's cheap, I have to keep reminding myself, but we're just trying to compare these two watches. Polished bezel, not a fan on this design. You know, you just look for a brush bezel, sorry, when you see this design, because it's homaging a particular watch. Bracelet, clear winner San Martin, much more substantial bracelet, higher quality bracelet, nicer fitted end links, bit of a nicer brushing as well, and a better clasp than the Pagani design. Yeah, it just feels a lot more rattly. Definitely, you can tell it's a lot cheaper than the San Martin. But, you know, that being said, where does that leave us? So in terms of scoring, where do we sit? So the San Martin scored 11 points, and the Pagani design scored 5. So the San Martin is twice as better on paper. But how do I calculate kind of value for money? Well, I just minus the difference between the price. So the Pagani design is 93 out of any sale promotion, whereas the San Martin is 208. So you've got a price difference of 115. That means each point that the San Martin is better is costing you £19, which is maybe just under $30, if I'm not wrong. So $30 per point. Those points are hefty points, I have to say. But I always say I think San Martin are at least £40, right? Or $70-ish overpriced, you know, in my honest opinion. So if you manage to get this in the sale price, definitely the better watch, better value for money watch over the PD as well, I'd say. But as it currently stands, it is a tough one. It's a tough one because just off that huge price difference, it's not $160 dollar watch better than the Pagani design, just because of all the things that have been done. That just shows that San Martin, as many people say, they're a bit inflated, at least 20% inflated, I have to say. If they bring that down, definitely the one to go for. But having said that, current as it stands, yes, I would not buy the Pagani. I would spend my money on the San Martin because I'll just feel happier wearing it. The case, everything around that watch is much better than the Pagani design. And I think minus the dial hands that I've mentioned, the perfect watch would be put the PD dial in the San Martin, and then you've got a great watch. So I think they need to do some sort of cross collaboration, right? Not collaborate with Watch Dives, but collaborate with Pagani design and come out with the ultimate homage to the watch they're homaging. So that's it from me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed that, and let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and I'll catch you on the next video.